Global Accessibility Awareness Day, Accessibility Meets Sustainability, 18th of May 2023, online from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Transmedia Catalonia logo, GAD logo, Access Cat logo, Generalitat de Catalunya Departaments de Recerca y Universitats logo, Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona logo, GreenCent logo, GDA Green Digital Accessibility logo.
Perfect. So welcome everyone to our webinar, When Accessibility Meets Sustainability, organized as part of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. My name is Chiara Gunella, and I'm a Communication and Dissemination Officer and Researcher at Transmedia Catalonia. I have medium-length light brown hair, green eyes, and a piercing on my right nostril, and today I'm sitting in my room. And I will be guiding you through these different sessions that we will be having today. This event was co-organized by four partners: Transmedia Catalonia, Xarxa Access Cat, GreenCent, and the GDA Organizing Committee. Transmedia Catalonia is our research group, and what we do is to research accessibility in different fields, from game accessibility to universal access to 360 immersive experiences that are accessible, and much more. Xarxa Access Cat is a knowledge transfer Catalan initiative focusing on accessibility in different fields. GreenCent is an European project aiming to foster environmental awareness through accessible smart education. And the GDA Organizing Committee is the committee that is organizing the Green Digital Accessibility Conference. And my colleague in the next session will introduce you a bit more to the conference, so I don't want to spoiler the content. So now we introduce you a bit more to who we are, but now I would like to know who you are. Who are the people joining our webinar? And again, thank you so much for joining our webinar. So I will briefly go to another page, which is this one. Can you confirm that you can see the Mentimeter page, please?
We can.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So now please go on www.menti.com and try to add this code, which is 58187941, and try to answer to this question: what country are you connecting from? On the screen, there is the image of several maps lying on the floor. We just want to know where are you from, and yes, from where you are connected. Okay, so we have people from Spain, France, Ireland, England. For the time being, a lot of people from Spain are connected. Romania, Greece, Italy as well, Turkey, England, several people from England, Romania again. Okay, let's wait a few seconds more. Spain again. And as a reminder, if you want to add your answer, just go to www.menti.com and use the code 58187941. Okay, I think it's great to see that we all come from different countries, because we may perceive accessibility and sustainability in a different way depending on our context. I see other people from UK, Spain again, England. Okay, let's move to the second and last question for you. So you don't need to change the code, it's the same. And the second question for you is, what is your specific area of study or profession? Media accessibility researcher, UX designer, translation studies, education research, digital accessibility, audiovisual translator, health and social care, media accessibility, audio description, accessibility researcher. Okay, so media accessibility so far is the main category chosen by this group. I can also see health and social care again, UX design, and audio description. So I think this is also an element that will enrich our conversation, since we may be interested in accessibility and sustainability for different reasons. Education research, translation study again, and civil engineering. And we still have some ad researcher, and again, education research. So again, yes, I think this will really enrich our conversation, since we may be interested in accessibility and sustainability for different reasons, for education, for media accessibility, for audiovisual translation and education research. So again, thank you for being here and also for answering to this question that will also help us developing our next webinar. So going back to our slide, I just want to briefly show you the agenda of today. We will have 4 panels. The first one will be Accessibility Meets Sustainability, Bridging the Gap, where the postdoctoral researcher and Transmedia Catalonia, Sarah McDonough, will present her research. Afterwards, we will have Irene Hermosa Ramirez, postdoctoral researcher and Transmedia Catalonia, presenting Universal and Ecological Design in Media Accessibility, Finding Common Ground. Afterwards, Mariana González Sordea will present Can Easy Language Make Website More Sustainable? And last but not least, Marta Brescia Zapata, predoctoral researcher at Transmedia Catalonia, will present Green Conferences for All, an approach to accessible and sustainable events. And at the end, you will have around 20-25 minutes to ask questions to our speakers. You will be able to ask questions at the end through the chat or raising your hand. So from my side, it's all. And I will give the floor to Sarah McDonough that will present, as I said, Accessibility Meets Sustainability, Bridging the Gap. And thank you, Sarah, again for joining our webinar.
Thank you, Chiara. I'm just going to share my screen now, so just bear with me. If Teams will allow it, it usually takes some time. Before I begin, or while I wait for it to upload, my thanks to Chiara for helping organise this, and people at Transmedia, of which I'm part of, for helping organise this event as part of GAD. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to go into full mode now. So, see from start. Okay, so thank you to Chiara for the introduction. It's really great to see so many of you tuning in remotely from all different parts of the world as part of GAD. So to begin with, I'm just going to audio describe myself. So I'm a 31-year-old woman with dark brown hair, which I have down. I'm wearing my headphones and gold earrings, and I have a white top and a navy shirt on, and my pronouns are she and her. So the title of my presentation today is Accessibility Meets Sustainability, Bridging the Gap. And I really just want to reflect on some of the intersections between the concepts of accessibility and sustainability. And I'm going to look at how we can better integrate these two concepts more holistically. And this really is the project of research that we are doing at Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, where we're trying to make sure that conversations about accessibility are not lost when we talk about sustainability or climate change, which of course is the most pressing challenge that we face as a society today. So on to my next slide then. I have an illustration of a bridge, which kind of stands in as a metaphor for my talk. So before I begin, talking about drawing parallels between accessibility and sustainability, I think it's important to briefly mention the legislative framework that governs these two important concepts. So as many of you will know, the United Nations introduced the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2006, and its remit was to protect and promote the right of people with disabilities to ensure their full participation in society. And as a piece of legislation, the convention recognised that people with disabilities have the same fundamental rights as everyone else, and that they should be able to exercise these rights on an equal basis. And it covers a wide range, really, of areas related to disability rights, including accessibility, education, health, politics, or political participation, and access to justice. And the convention requires countries who have ratified it to take steps to eliminate discrimination and the barriers faced by people with disabilities. Now, in terms of sustainability, the Paris Agreement, which was drafted in 2015 and came into effect in 2016, is a legally binding treaty on climate change. And it aims to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. And the Paris Agreement really is a landmark agreement because it brought together for the first time nations across the world to combat climate change and its effects. And how it works is the Paris Agreement works on a 5-year cycle, so in which countries who have signed it, they commit to increasingly ambitious climate action plans. So by 2020, countries had to communicate their plans, and these plans are known as nationally determined contributions, which I'll discuss a little bit later on in the presentation. And what these are is, this is where countries outline the actions that they will take to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in order to reach the targets set by the Paris Agreement. And they also include actions that the countries will take to build resilience and also to adapt to the impacts of rising temperatures. So while the Paris Agreement doesn't explicitly mention people with disabilities, it recognises the importance of promoting and considering the rights of different groups, including those who will be disproportionately affected by climate change, and that includes people with disabilities. So moving on then to the next slide. So the Paris Agreement forms one part really of a global effort to tackle climate change and its effects. Another is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which are much more broader in scope, and they seek to address major global challenges, such as environmental, but also economic and social issues as well. So where does accessibility fit within the wider sustainability agenda, we might ask? So the SDGs, they address intertwined issues of accessibility and sustainability across various different goals. So namely, we have on this slide, goal 4, which is quality education, goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth, goal 10, reduced inequalities, goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, and also goal 16, peace, justice and strong institutions. We can also include goal 17, which is partnerships for goals. So moving on then, here on this slide we have a quotation from the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, who in a foreword to the UN's Disability and Development Report said that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is the world's globally agreed plan for peace and prosperity for all on a healthy planet. But this vision of a better future can only be achieved with the full participation of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Upholding the rights and ensuring the full inclusion of the world's billion persons with disabilities is not only a moral imperative, but also a practical necessity. So as Guterres mentions, we need to involve everyone in our collective effort to combat environmental collapse, and that includes people with disabilities. So with this in mind, then, I'd just like to turn to some specific concerns of people with disabilities in the context of our changing environment. So firstly, obviously, people with disabilities face issues when it comes to accessing emergency evacuation facilities. There's also the issue of access to environmental information in alternative formats. So, for example, sign language interpreting, captioning, as well as audio description. And by providing accessible information, in particular to people with disabilities, we can actually strengthen their capacity to participate in climate mitigation planning and also emergency preparedness. So if we take to use an example then to illustrate the specific concern of people with disabilities, we can look at examples in the past. So in 2005, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in the United States of America, we can take this as an example. So according to a report by the National Council on Disability in the US, people with disabilities were disproportionately affected by both hurricanes because their needs were overlooked by authorities. So for example, people with disabilities were often unable to evacuate because transportation and evacuation shelters were not accessible to them. There was also the case of people with visual and hearing impairments who were unable to access important, sometimes life-saving information because it was not available in alternative formats. So with that in mind, then, we might ask what has changed since 2005. Has the situation improved for people with disabilities now that we are more aware of the importance of an inclusive approach to sustainability, as we have seen in the UN Sustainable Development Goals? Well, sadly, for people with disabilities, they continue to be overlooked in climate mitigation and adaptation planning. A 2022 report by the McGill Centre for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism and International Disability Alliance, where they examined the mentions of people with disabilities in their nationally determined contributions of member states that signed the Paris Agreement. Remember that the nationally determined contributions, these actually outline the measures implemented by countries to limit their carbon gas emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Well, what the authors found in this report, they found, I quote, that most references to disability and people with health conditions or chronic illness in states' climate adaptation policies are cursory in nature. In many policies, persons with disabilities are listed amongst other groups, especially vulnerable to climate change impacts, but without further detail as to the measures that should be taken to ensure the inclusivity of adaptation measures. So despite acknowledging the vulnerabilities of people with disabilities to climate change, member states fail to present tangible actions or strategies to effectively address these challenges. What the writers of the report found that among the 192 state parties that actually signed the Paris Agreement, only 35 of them directly referred to people with disabilities in their nationally determined contributions. However, even in those cases, there was a notable absence of specific information on how to address the unique needs of people with disabilities and incorporate them into the respective states' climate mitigation and adaptation plans. So governments are continuing to fail to fall short in addressing the needs of people with disabilities in their climate action, adaptation and mitigation planning. So where do we go from here? So what I'd like to do is just leave you with some questions to think about, and maybe we can discuss this after after the presentations. So the first question is, what actionable steps can we take to safeguard the rights of people with disabilities in our changing planet? And how can we bring sustainability and accessibility together more holistically? And most importantly, how can we incorporate the valuable insights of people with disabilities into our efforts to create a better world for all? So with that in mind, then, I'd like to make you aware of a conference that we are planning in Barcelona on the 30th November until the 1st of December. And it is the Green Digital Accessibility Conference. And it's actually our first edition, or second edition, because we had a very successful first edition last year. And the conference itself will touch on some of the topics that I and my fellow speakers today will talk about. And what we're really interested in is examining the intersections between sustainability and accessibility, and taking an intersectional approach to sustainability and disability. We're also interested in learning best practices from people in the industry as well as researchers on how best to combine sustainability and accessibility in traditional and digital media. I know that Chiara will post a link to the call for papers in the chat to this call. But what I can say is if any of you are interested in maybe discussing a paper or a workshop, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll just give you my contact details, which are on the next slide. I have my email here and my Twitter and LinkedIn. I usually use Twitter more than LinkedIn. I should say that the deadline for the conference call for papers is the 1st of June. So you still have time if you would like to submit something. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Here are some of the works that I've cited, and I'm just going to pass it over to Chiara again. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, for your presentation, and of course for giving us a legal framework, but also concrete examples that I think allow us to see the need of considering and the connection between accessibility and the intersection between accessibility and sustainability. For example, in the case of risk management plans, as you mentioned. Now I would like to give the floor, and please write notes about possible questions you want to ask to Sarah later on. I would like to give the floor to Irene Hermosa Ramirez with her presentation, Universal and Ecological Design in Media Accessibility. Thank you, Irene, for joining this webinar.
Can you see my screen already? Yes. There we go.
Yes.
Okay, so that should be good. So hello everyone, thank you for coming to this very interesting webinar. Well, my name is Irene Hermosa. I have dark long hair, sort of wavy. I'm a bit pale, and I have green eyes. I am youngish, I'd say. And yeah, I have a blurry background behind me. So today I'm going to share an updated version of a paper that I delivered in the Green Center conference last year, which focuses on the commonalities and divergences among the universal design paradigm and the ecological design one. So in a way, I will be replicating, this is a mainly theoretical presentation. I will be replicating Udo and Feld's studies that they did, assessing how live photo description fits or doesn't fit the universal design principles one by one, right? Well, I'm sure you are all familiar with them. There are 7, and I will be addressing one by one how they relate to ecological design principles, right? So my research questions are, where do these principles overlap and where do they diverge from each other? So these are my hypotheses, that these are the results that I think would come up. We'll see if it's true or not. So just as a quick literature review, sort of, so to speak, while universal design has some set principles, ecological design has different paradigms or proposals, and even the name ecological design principles. We've got also sustainable design principles, green design principles, eco design principles. So you can see already that when we talk about these principles, we may be referring to different things. Universal design, often we will cite, or we will refer to the very same 7, even though they've been tweaked and updated for different areas of knowledge, such as economics or universal design for learning and education. So the first step was to gather all of this literature on ecological, green, and so on design principles, and we found quite a number that could be relevant to compare to universal design. So, for example, Van der Rijn and Gowen cite 4, and their solutions grow from place, ecological accounting informs design, design with nature, everyone's a designer, make nature visible. We've also got Xu Yang, Friedman, and Coates meet the inherent needs of humans, move towards resource sustainability, maintain ecological integrity, and so on. And we've also got a third one, respect for the wisdom of nature, natural system, the biomimicry principle, respect for people, the human vitality principle, respect for place, the ecosystem principle. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what we can find under the ecological design principle umbrella, if you will. So now to the core of this paper. The first principle of universal design is the one that sets the tone for the rest of them, and it is equitable use. And in this case, remember that I was thinking of how they relate, if they correspond, if they are coherent with green design principles, or if they are divergent. In this case, it was crystal clear that they go towards the same goal, right? The equitable use principle adheres to the same idea of meeting the inherent needs of humans, or the human vitality principle. So because this is a presentation on media accessibility, I wanted to give you some examples. And the idea here is how can media access service avoid ecological damage? And some of the ideas that are found in other authors were upcycling or translating audio descriptions, which could be less resource heavy process than making audio descriptions for every single language from the beginning. And also accessible filmmaking, integrated audio description, and other proposals, which arguably would be also less resource dependent if they are included, if accessibility is included in the production and original plan, right? Or at least it would be easier to have a clear idea on how many resources, energy, and so on we're consuming during the process, right? So for equitable use, we see a correspondence between universal design and ecological design. Then for flexibility in use, which reads the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. This one resonates with an idea that has been very popular in media accessibility recently, and that is that the preferences of users should be included in the design. So this very much, once again, resonates with the everyone is a designer principle from ecological design. And well, it could be basically applied in personalization initiatives in media accessibility. So just to give you an idea of how closely related they are, in this case, I wanted to read you a quote from this ecological design principle, and it reads: ecological design suggests a deeply participatory process in which technical disciplinary languages and barriers are exchanged for a shared understanding of the design problem. Ecological design changes the old rules about what counts for knowledge and who counts as knower. So I'm sure this rings a bell for many of us who are in the accessibility arena. Now, for principle 3 and partially 7, which are simple and intuitive use and appropriate size and space for approach and use, we see that they are somewhat unrelated to all of the literature review on the ecological design principles. So what my argument here would be that they are unrelated, but they could be compatible. They could work together. So we could add to these universal design principles an add-on, so to speak, while maintaining ecological integrity, while moving toward resource sustainability, while protecting the natural habitat, And in this case, when we are adding principles of universal design to principles of ecological design and vice versa, we should be cautious because there's a risk, which was already found by Fryer, maybe this risk of art over access, which may apply if we involve the creators in the media accessibility production. They might get carried away and forget a little bit about the needs of the users. Again, this risk could be applicable as well if sustainability reigns over access needs, right? Or vice versa. But, well, this is just a word of caution. For principle 4, which is perceptible information, same idea as with the previous two. Their universal design, this universal design principle and other ecological design principles remain seemingly unrelated, but they could be compatible. In this case, the designer should communicate information so that it is not only legible, but communicated to the users through a variety of channels, prioritizing the most sustainable option. See, this is the argument that I wanted to share with you on how we can reconcile these two paradigms. And I have some more examples following this line of thought, which is use different modes, with pictorial, verbal, tactile for redundant presentation of essential information, prioritizing the most sustainable option. And again, provide compatibility with a variety of techniques or devices used by people with sensory limitation, prioritizing the most sustainable option. Okay. And now there's the tricky part. It could not all be easy and well, easily solvable. Principles 5 and 6, and also partially principle 7, which are tolerance for error and low physical effort. Well, this design, which is tolerant for error or that may require less physical effort, is not necessarily the natural design, okay? So the natural design, in other words, may not be the most tolerant for error, or it may be physically demanding. What do we do with it? Well, this is like the main question that remains here. And to give you an outlook, a general outlook on how we can integrate ecological design into universal design principles, we have some easy routes, which are, well, the case of some of the principles which overlap, simply said, with others of ecological design, and also the potential of combining principles which are unrelated but are not antagonistic. The issue will be when we meet certain principles which are, well, not the most natural one, not the most sustainable option, but still required for universal design. Again, the solution to this could be a universal ecological design model, which addresses specifically these disparities and also what gives emphasis to those principles that do overlap. So the idea would be going forward to apply some sort of a combination of both when developing new media access services or improving current ones, or even as professionals when making decisions on which tools to use or which sort of website I will have, and so on. So I believe that is it from me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer your questions after or via email. I will write it in the chat as well.
Thank you, Irene, for your presentation and for introducing us to ecological design and universal design, because not all of us may be familiar with these two areas, and also for giving us a new option which is building up ecological universal design. So as Irene said, at the end of the 4 sessions, you will have time to ask questions. And now it's the turn of the next presentation and speakers, Mariona González Sordé, with her presentation, Our Easy Language Website, Greener. So Mariona, the floor is yours, and thank you again for joining the webinar.
Thank you, Chiara, and thank you as well for presenting me. I will now share my screen. Okay, hopefully now you can see.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, hello. My name is Mariona González Sordé, and I am a PhD student at Transmedia Catalonia. I am a 26-year-old woman with brown hair, and today I'm wearing green earrings and black and white jumper. And just as Irene, I am also presenting an updated version of the study I presented at last year's Green Digital Accessibility Conference, which is titled, Can Easy Language Make Websites More Sustainable? And that's like the initial question that motivated this study. So I wanted to assess the intersection between website accessibility and website sustainability, putting a focus on easy language, which is my area of research. So as I am sure a lot of you know, and as we discussed in last year's conference, the internet is a very polluting industry and environment. Studies say that it is responsible. So the information and communications technology industry is responsible for around 2% of global CO2 emissions. And if we see it from another perspective, and let's say that we turn the internet to a country, it would be as polluting as Germany, for example. So for this reason, a lot of organizations and initiatives have appeared, which work towards making the internet more sustainable. One of these organizations, which is Whole Green Digital, define sustainable web projects in their manifesto as being clean, efficient, open, honest, regenerative, and resilient. And when reading this list and the characteristics of each one of these goals, that was the basis of my theory, which is that easy language adaptations could make websites more efficient and therefore more sustainable. Why is that? Easy language content is adapted not only in terms of linguistic adaptations, but also in format, and always with the goal to make this content easier to understand, comprehend. And this normally translates in simpler formatting and writing. So that being said, the fact that web content should be easier to understand is defended in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines from W3C. And my what I defend is that this can be achieved through easy language. In fact, there are multiple recommendations in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that defend and agree to what it is advised in easy language guidelines. This is just 3 examples, but I found multiple examples throughout my study. And this indicates that adapting web content to easy language would be one way to meet also the W3C guidelines. And well, that being said, I'm going to present the aims of my study. So firstly, I wanted to assess whether adopting easy language in web design could not only improve website accessibility, which I just exposed why I think that is, but also their sustainability. And secondly, to be able to have small evidence of this, I conducted a comparative study of different websites to provide evidence of this common ground between sustainability and accessibility in websites. So what I did was search for websites that had 2 versions, one in standard language and one in easy language, and compute their CO2 production through an online calculator, a website carbon calculator in this case. One of the factors that this calculator takes into account is the data transfer over the wire, which again reinforces my theory, which is that websites in easy language and simpler content will require less data transfer or less data to be loaded. This will make them more efficient and ultimately more sustainable. So this slide shows a graph, on the results of CO2 production once these 6 websites in both versions were introduced in the calculator. And 5 out of the 6 websites showed an improvement in terms of sustainability. 4 of them, or 3 of them, in a quite dramatic way, and only one of the websites showed worse results for the easy language version, and now we will discuss why. And there is a red area, which is the area of CO2 production that the online calculator used, considered over the average CO2 production of websites. So it would be an indicator of quite a bad result. So I will go over some examples of the websites analyzed and discuss why these results can be caused. So Fedagafe is the only website that showed worse results for its easy language version. And as this example shows, the screen on the left is the standard language version. The screen on the right is always the easy language version. So there are no adaptations in terms of format, interactions, content distribution. The only adaptation that is shown is in terms of text. If you see the text under the title Órgano cerebral adquirido, has changed, but actually the text in the easy language version is longer and has more characters, which might be the reason for the worst results in terms of CO2 production. GenU is one example of an improvement, but a very slight one in comparison to the other websites. But if we look into the standard language version, we can see that it's already quite simple to navigate. You can navigate the content through a top to bottom scroll. There are not a lot of media, unnecessary media or content. The interactions are quite simple. And while the easy language version shows a lot of adaptations also in terms of menus, which are even more simple, it shows more multimedia content. It shows a lot of icons, and even so, we could think maybe this would translate in more data to be loaded, and therefore worse results. But even so, since the content and the interactions are also a lot simplified, the results were better for this one. And finally, both Fundación AMAS and WWDA showed a drastic decrease of CO2 production for the easy language version. I will focus on Fundación AMAS, and then we'll go to the final discussion and conclusions. This one, it's already obvious that they look like two different websites almost. So the standard language version for this website had a lot of content that changed even though you did not click on it or interact with it. There are videos, there's a lot of interactive content, and you cannot access all the content just by scrolling. You need to interact, change the page. And on the other side, we can see the easy language version, which is completely the complete opposite. It's just a menu that you can access different pages, which are just plain text. So that after seeing that, the results of this small study point towards the assumption that the cause of better results in terms of sustainability are well-performed easy language website adaptations that consider aspects like interaction, format, and not only textual aspects. And finally, this is only an initial study that aims to foster future research that ultimately has some implications for website designers and developers who want to make websites more accessible and sustainable. And yeah, that is all. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I will gladly answer to your questions at the end, or I will also share my email in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariona, for introducing us to this new field of study and research. Since we saw that in the Mentimeter there are several web designers joining this webinar, I think it would be interesting for them to go through your slides and ask questions in the end. So now we go through the last presentation of the day by Marta Brescia Zapata, which will present Green Conferences for All, an approach to accessible and sustainable events. Marta, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, Chiara, thank you very much. And thank you for taking care of my slides, because my Teams doesn't want to work today. I don't know why. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Marta Brescia, and I am also working at the Transmedia Catalonia research team. And before going on with my presentation, I'd like to briefly describe myself in an accessible way. I am a 28 years old white Mediterranean woman. I've got short, kind of messy black hair. And today, as usually, I'm wearing a black shirt and I'm sitting at home in front of a plain blue wall. And my pronouns are she, her. And for the next 15 minutes, I will be talking about green conferences for all, an approach to accessible and sustainable events. And next slide, please. In this presentation, I will first go through the background and I talk about some guidelines on accessibility and sustainability. Then I'll show you the methodology and results from a couple of workshops we organized last year. And then I will give you a practical example of an accessible and sustainable conference, which was the first edition of the GDA. And then I'll go through some conclusions. So to explain the motivation behind this presentation, we have to go back to 2022 when we came up with the idea of celebrating the GDA conference. I was part of the organizing committee and I was aware about the difficulty of holding an event taking into account accessibility and sustainability requirements. So the first logical step was to ask myself, hey, how can we organize a hybrid conference that is accessible and green at the same time? Well, sadly, after some research, I discovered that currently there are no guidelines or standards covering both accessibility and sustainability in live, hybrid, or online events. So some of the guidelines I review regarding sustainability were the guidelines on organizing sustainable meetings and events at the Commission. This one is at a European level. It's a really, really long one, but also it has a lot of good ideas regarding sustainability. And also in a more local context, I also went through the Guía de Congresos Més Sostenibles. This is from Barcelona. And the other one from the UAB point of view, they also have like kind of good practices recommendation for sustainable events. And surprisingly, none of the guidelines even talk about accessibility, not even mentioning the word accessibility. And here I have a quote to describe what a sustainable or green event is. And it can be described as an event which is designed, organized, and implemented in a way that minimizes potential negative impacts and leaves a beneficial legacy for the host community and all involved. And if we go now to accessibility guidelines, it is important to say that back in 2010, the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative published a checklist for accessible events, conferences, training, and presentation, both remote, virtual, in-person, hybrid, in all the formats, the possible formats. But again, the topic of sustainability is not covered within this checklist. In the absence of guidelines, many universities across the United States, such as the Cornell University, Kansas, Oregon, and so on, have created also their own checklist to organize accessible events. But again, they are not covering sustainability. Now I have another quote to describe accessibility. This one is from the W3C and says that sessions that are accessible to people with disabilities are also inclusive to many more audiences. For example, people with different learning styles, people that are not fluent in the language, and accessible sessions also have additional benefits to organizations and individuals. In light of all that, we decided to organize some workshops aiming to settle a discussion on how to prepare guidelines and recommendations to organize sustainable and fully accessible events. We had the possibility to carried out a first workshop in Brussels as part of the New European Bauhaus Fair. The title was Accessibility Meets Sustainability, How to Organize a Green and Accessible Event. And we carried out another workshop in Barcelona during the research night, and the title was Go Green, Cómo organizar un evento sostenible y accesible. In Brussels, we had 5 participants, and in Barcelona, we had 4. We decided to divide the workshops into 2 parts. We had a first part, which goes from step 1 to step 5 in this figure. And this part was focused on introducing the concept of accessibility and sustainability to the participants. To that aim, we used some tools, interactive tools such as a Mentimeter, and also we show to the participant how to use a carbon footprint calculator. The second part had only 2 steps, but it was a bit longer than the first part, and it's more practical. And the main step was a hands-on activity where the participants were asked to work together to develop a series of sustainable and accessible recommendations to take into account before, during, and after an event. And there was a last step before debriefing the session where we share some tips with the participants to the tips for accessible communication in social media like LinkedIn, Twitter, and so on. So in this slide, you can see 2 screenshots from Mentimeter, and with the answers to the 2 questions we asked to our participants in the workshop that were, what does accessibility mean to you, and what does sustainability mean to you? And it was actually a great way to introduce the concept, to know more or less where the participants were, and to continue going deeper into these questions. For the hands-on activity, we designed this table to ask the participant to think about some recommendations on good or good practicing before, during, and after an event. As a way to help them, we offered 5 categories, taking from all the guidelines we consulted before the workshops. They were venues, waste, suppliers, catering, and communication. Accessibility was addressed as a transversal theme in all categories, and after 20-minute discussion, all the ideas were put together on a whiteboard, and we were talking about them, and some new thoughts came out. After the workshops, we put together all the ideas that arose during the hands-on session, and we decided to create this accessibility and sustainability chain that has 6 steps. Step 1 would be, of course, legislation. Now we know a lot about legislation. Thank you, Sarah. But not only that, also attitude is very important. The will to organize a truly accessible and sustainable event is very important, combined with the legislation. Then we have step 2, communication, how we spread the words, how we communicate our event. We have step 3, which is the accessibility and sustainability of the venue. Step 4 is dealing with the content. We have to take into account that all content before, during, and after the event is accessible and sustainable. Step 5 would be the exchange of good practices. And step 6, very important one, to gather some feedback from the audiences. So all lessons learned during this workshop were then used to organize the first edition of the Green Digital Accessibility Conference that took place on 2nd December 2022 in Barcelona in a hybrid format. I wanted to give you some general ideas about the conference so you understand better the decision we took before, during, and after to consider accessibility and sustainability. For example, we promoted the event mostly online via LinkedIn, Twitter, and also the Transmedia Catalonia website, but also in person, for example, during the workshops. The venue we chose is located in the city center, and it is also really well connected to other neighborhoods by metro, and it's also accessible with wheelchairs. For the people attending in person, we prepared a welcome pack, and we sent it via email in order to inform them about the steps we follow to minimize the carbon footprint of the event, and also about the accessibility options. And for the online participants, they were joining the event through Microsoft Teams, of course, because it offers a lot of accessibility features. And also for the coffee and lunch breaks, we decided to go to local suppliers. And regarding the waste policy, we had a series of bins, recycled bins around the building, and they were like color coordinated, so it was easier to sort all the waste. Now some figures in the next slide. Thank you, Chiara. This was really important for us because we wanted to gather feedback from participants. So we prepared an online questionnaire that was sent after the event, of course, via email. And it is actually step 6 in this accessibility and sustainability chain we designed after the workshops. So this evaluation form was inspired by a model proposed by Inclusion Europe, and it was designed using Google Forms. It combined 3 types of questions, 5 points like a scale, open questions, and also single choice questions. We had 13 participants, 4 attending online and 9 in person. Here we are 2 figures showing the answers to 2 of the most relevant questions, which are how would you rate the sustainability of the GDA and how would you rate the accessibility of the GDA. In this figure, 1 means not sustainable or not accessible at all, and 5 maximum means very sustainable or very accessible. Regarding sustainability, 54% participant think that it was a very sustainable event, and regarding accessibility, 39% agreed that it was very accessible conference. We had 0 for not sustainable or not accessible at all, so we are very happy about these results. In general, the aspects more valued by the people answering the questionnaires were the new ideas that came up during the conference, also the very nice and friendly atmosphere, and that we consider sustainability when organizing the event. About the issues, they highlighted that the event was a bit too long, so the duration of the event was not the best, so to say. And in terms of accessibility, some participants mentioned live captioning as a feature that might be improved in future editions. To conclude, some general ideas, just to sum up all that I just said, is that events should prioritize a balance, or it would be good to find a balance between human activity, resources, and the environment, always avoiding the excess and the waste. Also, that achieving sustainability and accessibility in events requires a collaboration. It's not only about people organizing the events, but also about attendees, the communities involved, the suppliers, and of course the politicians. So from the event organizer, what they can do to promote sustainability and accessibility is through eco-friendly practices and also through inclusive policies. Also, attendees, they play a role and they can make informed choices and also take individual actions. And for the future, what we would like to do is to develop a carbon footprint calculator so we can assess the real carbon footprint of accessible events. And going back to Irene's presentation, that could be a great way to address this disparity between accessibility and sustainability and try to find a balance or maybe take further actions. So that was all. We are right on time. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. And you can also send me an email. I'll be very happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta, for actually presenting us a new methodology to co-create accessible and sustainable events, giving us the example of our Green Digital Accessibility Conference. So actually, I just want to thank again all the speakers and all my colleagues for organizing this event and for supporting in creating this event. And now the floor is yours. The floor is now to the public to ask our speakers a question about their presentation. And please, since Irene Hermosa Ramirez will have to leave early this webinar, if you have some questions related to her presentation that I remind you was Universal and Ecological Design in Media Accessibility, please, let's try to start with questions to Irene. I remind you that you can ask questions through the chat or raising your hand through the platform. So let's start with the questions. Yes, we have a question from Estela Noguer.
Hi, thank you very much for all your presentations. I think that for me it was clear that accessibility and sustainability should be hand in hand, or at least more hand in hand. I have a lot of questions in my mind, but since Irene has to leave, I would ask a question to Irene. One of the main issues or questions that we have a kind of a problem is on dealing with universal design principles and in digital environments. Mm-hmm. So, because universal design principles are actually in built-in environments, and then when you put this into a digital environment, this complicates the things because the entrance door of a building is not the entrance door to a website. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, how have you considered this also in relation to sustainability?
Yes, so this is very relevant because we know that universal design principles were not originally planned for media accessibility either. So this is an issue that we have to deal with in every application of universal design. And of course, maybe the solution would be to not so much keep these set in stone universal design principles for everything, but to rather develop more specific principles for each field of application, so to speak, or expand them. Again, this will be necessary if we want to join universal design and sustainable design, but for sure, and websites and digital accessibility, low physical effort, for example, where does it fit in digital accessibility? We need to consider these things. For instance, ecological design does this better, or maybe not, because then we have a bunch of models that we have to be aware of, and universal design is homogeneous, so to speak. But again, it leaves out, I would argue it leaves out media accessibility as well. So for me, the idea would be to continue doing research and come up with an evidence-based, universal, updated, or specific to our field only model. I hope that answers your...
Thanks a lot.
I have a question for you, Irene, if there are no questions from the audience, which is if you can expand a bit more on the comparison between art over access and sustainability over access.
Yes. So
thank you.
What I was saying was it's a risk because for the first example, for the first principles, I was saying that they go hand in hand with ecological design principles. The issue comes when they're unrelated, or even worse, when they appear to be contradictory. So how do we make that decision? Which one is more relevant? That's not the question that we should be asking. We should be aiming to achieve both at the same time and coming up with an universal ecological design principles. But yeah, this is the thing. When we in the art over access risk, the problem is because so much creativity or creative ideas are incorporated by the director of a movie or a creator of a theater play. Imagine they start doing audio description with rhyming, creative subtitles all around. That's very cool. That's very nice, and it's very valuable as long as accessibility is fostered as a need, right? So the same thing. I wanted to make this comparison because this could be the case when doing some. Well, imagine as in the case of Mar, if we put all of our focus in making an accessible conference, but we do not think of the sustainable or the carbon footprint, for example. We're not doing at least something that adheres to universal ecological design. We're doing something else.
Thank you, Irene. It's a really concrete answer, actually. As Estela said, I think it's possible to combine accessibility and sustainability. We just need to study and make sure that we do it. So thank you again. I see that there is a question from John Gibbons. Please, the floor is yours. I hope I pronunciate your name in the correct way. If not, sorry. We can't hear you. If not, you can also write your question in the chat if it's easier. No, it's if not, we can, okay, take too long to type. Okay, we can move forward to other questions meantime, but if you want to write down, John, I recommend you to do it so we can have your questions either to respond to your question now or to answer to your question now or through email. So, okay, so thank you, Irene, for your answers. So now I open the floor to also other questions to the other three presentation that we had. We still have 15 minutes for questions. Let's wait a few seconds. Okay, I see Estela.
I am pushing. I will push questions because I thought that it was presentations were very nice and very relevant. For Mar, well, for all of the speakers. So if you want to speak one after the other, I would like to know which are the next steps, or which do you consider the next steps to follow according to your research linked to a better improvement of sustainability and accessibility?
Okay, as you call me by my name, I will start. And actually, for me, it's going to be, I think, quite easy because I've got all these answers from the questionnaire. So we know what the participants, the people coming to our events, what they think or what they experience. And they share with us a lot of interesting ideas. And to me, I know we're starting like making people aware that there is a link between accessibility and sustainability, but still there is a long way, because now in terms of, for example, from my side, in terms of guidelines or standards, there is nothing combining accessibility and sustainability like in words, because you can interpret, as Sarah was trying to explain in this legal context, you can try to think that you can consider accessibility by saying this, but this is not, they are not putting this in front of you together. So I think going in the way of standardization, or at least guidelines, official guidelines combining both for events, in my case, that would be the next step.
Yeah, I agree with Mar. And I think, yeah, the first step is already taken, which was like exploring the common ground between sustainability and accessibility in terms of digital media. And when it comes to websites, I think, first of all, of course, more research, and as Mar says, maybe guidelines or standards would be great. Of course, even though further research shows that easy language websites are a lot less polluting, I wouldn't really hope for all websites to be in an easy language. I don't think we're at that stage that we would accept that. But maybe having some guidelines that the practice of website development and design stick to, finding some common ground and some practices of English language that could be adapted and that would help make websites sustainable would be great.
I'd like to add something here as well. Thank you for your question, Estella. I think for me, I think what's quite important is to advocate for the inclusion of accessibility in sustainability policy. So making sure that there's actually concrete measures in place to include people with disabilities in any sort of planning that governments do in terms of planning for sustainability in the future and meeting their targets in terms of the Paris Agreement. What I would say in terms of the work that we do here in Transmedia and at UAB, our speciality is in media accessibility, but we integrate that into all the projects that we work on. And we're very lucky now to work on a project about sustainability. So our role within that project is accessibility. So we're actually combining the two. So we're working on creating accessible applications that people can use to monitor their environments. So it's a concrete example of combining the two concepts together in a project. So I mean, we're very lucky to be able to do that, but I think it just demonstrates that you can combine the two.
Thanks, Sarah, for answering, and for Stella for your questions. I can see John comment in the chat. If you wanna, I will read it through it. So his comment is, I was interested about the overlap in the language we use around accessibility and sustainability. So inclusive guidelines, more inclusive of other protected characteristics such as race, gender, and sustainability being as much about all people and society as environment. Irene mentioned universal ecological guidance. What should we calling this area of research, given both inclusion and sustainability should encapsulate people as well as planet? Sorry, it's too long. It's so long. It's fine. I don't know if Sarah or Mariona, you want to add a bit on this?
Well, I think it's very much a work in progress in terms of coming up with a name that that combines inclusion and sustainability. I mean, we tried to do that with our conference, calling it Green Digital Accessibility, but I think it's a work in progress. But I think we should be trying to make things sustainable and inclusive as much as possible, because we all need to be a part of the effort to combat climate change, and also ensure that the people who will be most vulnerable or most affected are protected from that, because they will be adversely affected by that. But in terms of our terms and terminology, I think it's an evolving process, and I think, John, that we should continue having these conversations so we can come up with something, maybe.
Yeah, actually, we discussed a lot about the title of our conference because we wanted to combine both, but the best way we found was simply saying accessibility and sustainability. But yeah, I mean, the first thing is to link those two concepts and understand where they overlap, and that they actually are really kind of melting one in each other. This is the first step. And terminology is important, but also really hard. So yes, we hope that in next editions of the conference, I feel like sustainable should mean accessible, but our worldwide accepted language hasn't worked out that way. Yeah, agree. So come to Barcelona to the next conference.
Yes, you can come to our conference.
Yes,
and I just want to remind you that I will send you an email with our upcoming events, all the links, so that you can register to our conference or submit a paper or a workshop. And we will also share the recordings. I have 3 questions for you. We have 7 minutes, so I will go with them if you agree. So one is for Sarah, and it's what led you to this research area? If you can tell us a bit more. The second one, you go, and then I will ask the other one to Marion.
Okay, thank you, Chiara. So my background is in media accessibility, but as I mentioned when I was responding to Estella's question, I work on a project, a 3-year H2020 project here in Barcelona, in UAB, and it's called the Green SEM project. So it's Smart Citizen Education for a Green Future, and it's an educational program essentially where we're designing applications and platforms and also educational materials that people can use to basically to be a bit more sustainable and a bit more aware of environmental issues. And our role within that is making sure that all the materials and the apps and platforms that we create are accessible and usable to as many people as possible. So through that work, then I suppose we're a research team. It's not just me. It's Chiara, Pilar Herrero, Marina, Mar as well works with us from time to time. So it's kind of made us reflect a lot more on how we can combine the two, how we can combine our background in accessibility, media accessibility or digital accessibility, and the topic of sustainability. So it was a nice way to kind of to explore those kind of intersections just through that project. So that's what led me here.
Thank you, Sarah. We added in the chat the website of the project if you want to know more. And the second question is for Mariona. So I wanted to ask you, based on your findings, what do you think the optimal future practice of web development would be? If you can summarize a few points. I know it's a hard question.
Well, I think I would answer similarly to what I answered before with Mar. So for me, of course, one of my limitations is that I do not have knowledge on web design or web development. So my research in this study is very looking through the surface And then, of course, it's in the hands of people that know the inside of it to see what is feasible. But I also agree that some kind of guidelines for sustainable, accessible, and then there's like other areas that we also could work on, like inclusivity of other kinds, to make the digital environment more welcoming and more sustainable. That would be the goal to work towards. So my study was just aiming to give like a little bit my piece of knowledge, but then they should, of course, be developed into what can actually be put into practice to a standard on web design.
Thank you, Mariana. And the last question is for Marta, which is related to the GDA conference, the Green Digital Accessibility Conference, and is what was one of the biggest challenges while organizing the GDA in terms of making it sustainable and accessible for you?
Well, I'd say the format. I mean, we discussed also a lot about the possibilities of having it a full in-person or moving to online. And at the end, we decided to host a hybrid conference. And I think it posed a lot of challenges in terms of accessibility. For example, to ensure that all participants were going to have the same experience, the same level of experience, regardless of their location, abilities, and so on. Also, of course, a hybrid format requires a lot of technology in terms of captioning, sign language, and having accessible materials, the accommodation, the venue, everything. So yeah, overcoming all these accessibility barriers was crucial to ensure that the event was inclusive. And in terms of sustainability, of course, there is the carbon footprint, which increases when traveling for people coming in person, but also increases in the virtual parts, because also a call, it also generates a carbon footprint, even if we don't notice it. This is why I suggested creating this carbon footprint calculator for future editions to really assess the impact of the event. So a way to kind of minimize this environmental impact, we created this digital welcome tool, welcome kit, sharing with the participants some ideas, promoting like responsible travel choices, for example, for people attending in person. We also decided not to print the book of abstract and having instead a QR. So yeah, we took a lot of decisions because it was an hybrid event, and you have to have into account both people online and people in person. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Omar, for your answers. So we reached the end of our webinar, but I want to remind you a few things before leaving. One is that you will find online all the presentation. We will send you also the recording. And I also want to share with you the screen once time more, reminding you that if you want to know more about accessibility and actually about all the topics that you heard about today, consider joining our Master in Accessible Communication for a Diverse Society. And actually, lots of the speakers of today will be professors of this master. And now my colleague Sarah will share with you the link so that you can have a look at the page. And again, visit our Transmedia website if you want to know more. Consider submit a paper or workshop proposal for our Green Digital Accessibility Conference. and we will send you all the information about our upcoming events and the video soon during the next couple of days. Before leaving, if you want to do one last activity with us, just share in the chat how you have experienced this conference with a few words. So let's do a sort of chat storming, sharing a bit your thoughts and how was the conference for you. Again, thank you to all of you for joining, and thanks to my amazing colleagues for organizing this conference and for deciding joining it and be speakers during this event. So thank you again to all of you. And if you want to share your thoughts in the chat, feel free to do that before leaving. A few words like how you have experienced this webinar. And thank you again. Excellent stuff. Thank you. I look forward to GVA in November, December. Thanks to you all. I will read through the comments. While inspiring, informative, Jane Greenstock, thank you so much. Orla Hags, very insightful, thanks, thank you. Maria Eugenia La Reina, Morales, enlightening, relevant, and looking forward to meet you in GEA. Okay, I will wait a few more minutes, but thank you to all of you again for joining our conference, our webinar. And looking forward to see you in our conference. Thank you. We have a new message. Okay, let's close the webinar. Thank you to all of you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Chiara, for organizing.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Accessibility Meets Sustainability. 18th of May, 2023. Online from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Transmedia Catalonia logo. GAD logo. Access Cat logo. Generalitat de Catalunya, Departaments de Recerca y Universitats logo. Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona logo. GreenCent logo. GDA Green Digital Accessibility logo.